team pilot with Hobbyking and Precision Aerobatics, and today we are going to be focusing on warbirds. It's been a request that I do a video on how to fly, set up, and Maiden warbirds. So this is it. This is a beautiful Hellcat put together by a good friend of mine. It's a balsa model, and today we're going to get it trimmed out. We're going to fly it, land it, and we're going to teach you how to do it all safely. We're not going to be focusing so much on how to fly warbirds. I think what we are going to be doing is a bit more about how to set up, take off, land, and make the first flight of any warbird or scale model successful and safe. Of course, we are going to discuss how to fly them, but this is really more to focus on making sure that our first flight is safe and everything is set up properly and we understand how to land a warbird scale model or jet properly. Again, today is Warbird Day. We're going to be learning how to fly, set up, Maiden these warbirds. This is my old friend Mitch, and he's built two beautiful aircraft, a Dauntless and a Hellcat, and we're going to Maiden them today. For most of you scale guys, it's all about the details, and he's made a lot of adjustments to this and a lot of nice detail things to make this plane beautiful, including taking a couple of Ken doll arms and mounting them to the bust of the pilots to make them a bit more realistic. Very cool. Well, first things first, we are going to check the direction of every surface. Very simple, but it's something that needs to be done always. Right, left, that checks. Elevator up, down, that checks. Rudder left, right, that checks out. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go surface by surface to make sure that we mechanically set everything up at dead center. Geometry and proper mechanical setup is really important because it keeps your servos from being a little lopsided in the throw that they give, and gives us the opportunity to make sure if we need all the servo travel to get full deflection that we have it available. As you can see, I leveled the other aileron. This one is still a little bit off, so we need to mechanically adjust it to always have the servo arm dead straight out, and we're going to adjust the linkage here until this comes up and matches the other one. Now we're going to do the same exercise for the rudder and the elevator, and we should be ready to check the CG. I've gone over this many times for 3D aircraft, and it's in all the setup guides that I've done that you can find on the internet, but I want to go over it again. We need to set the mechanical travel on this surface and every other surface to where it reaches its maximum physical limit. So we're going to deflect it, and then we are going to adjust it to make sure it comes up as far as it'll go. And it's right there. I'm going to back it off a little bit. Then I'm going to go down, do the same thing, go until the surface wants to stop. Okay. And then back it off a tick. So what happens is, now I have the mechanical limits set. In this case, it's like 147 and 132. So what happens now is when I go to my rates, 100% will represent 100% of its potential travel. My recommendations on CG is always the same. Start exactly on the manufacturer's spec, but don't marry it. As soon as the plane goes up in the air, I'm going to check the CG, because seldom, especially with balsa built models like this, it'll always be a little off. So right now, I've set the travels, but the one thing I want to caution everybody on is there's something that a lot of people do that I vehemently disagree with, is they take off and fly and they do everything on low rates, especially for a Maiden, because they feel, easier to control, might be a little better. But it's the exact opposite. The only thing that can go wrong, on a Maiden takeoff or something, is generally too little speed, or you get a stall, or an engine quits or something. If the plane is not going fast, you need as much rates as possible to recover. If you can't recover, if you only have this much rate and the wing drops and you're going slow, You won't be able to turn it back. And same goes for the elevator. And so it's very important that we start this flight on high rates. I'm going to set the exponential now with the high rates to make sure it's going to feel similar to the low rates. So for small adjustments, you won't feel any difference. You'll only feel the difference when you go to full rates. You know, we've gone from start to finish on setup on the Hellcat, but the one thing it didn't have is flaps. So right now I'm setting up the flaps on this particular aircraft, and we're looking for a takeoff level of flaps, which I don't know if you can see here, but it's, I don't know, down maybe about an inch. And then we have it set to full flaps, which is really strong, and that is what's going to slow the aircraft down. In the video later, you'll see that the plane didn't want to slow down because it did not have flaps. Well, properly setting up the flaps is really important to getting that plane nice and slow. But there is a feature that most radios have that I'm going to show you that will help you set up the flaps to make sure they're even and properly set up. This is a function that it seems most RC pilots don't even bother with or don't really understand what it does. But it's called balance. And what this does is, in case you have a slight mismatch of servo geometry or the servos themselves are different or anything else like that, what balance does is it will make each of the servos travel at exactly the same rate from start to finish. They will finish at the same spot, they'll be at halfway at the same spot, quarter of the way, and there's different points of a curve here you can see that you can that we can adjust. In this case, I take that number and I adjust it up or down. So as it's going, it will slow, or it'll speed up here and then slow down. And if you need this one to just go a little faster or a little slower than the other side, then you just keep adjusting the curve to where it will travel exactly the same as the other side. It's something I can't actually demonstrate. This thing was set up really well from the geometry standpoint, so this plane will, the flaps are moving exactly together, the servos are identical, but I did want to, I just did want to show you this function. Here is another very common use for the balance function. I have two elevators, they're on two servos. Especially on my large aerobatic airplanes, when you deflect both rudders, the servos have to be going identically. In this case, this plane is set up very well, everything was very meticulously done, and the servos are identical, so they are traveling exactly the same. But it is very possible that, you know, from this angle, one will be up even 1/16 of an inch further than the other at this point, and it might exaggerate even more at this point. So basically the function is that we will take these this curve and we'll adjust it so the two of them match, and I do it with an inclinometer. And you can even do it with your cell phone. It's got a nice level function. It shows you exactly how many degrees it's deflected. On the Spectrum DX series radios, you get to that screen by, of course, getting to the function list. Go to Servo Setup, and it's the same on the new IS. You just select it differently. But here's travel, subtrim, reverse, speed, ABS travel, and now it says balance. You click on that, go to the next thing, and select the surface, right elevator. And now, as you can see here, they're straight across. But if there was an issue with it, you would see the curve. In fact, I'm going to select a model that actually has some balance being used and show you how it applied. Okay, here it is. This is the left elevator on a 100cc laser that I have. And as you can see, as I deflect the elevator, as I deflect the elevator down, you could see the line moving through, and as I deflect it up, you can see that it's slightly different. I made a complete curve, and what I did was I just matched that to the right elevator so that when they move at every point, they move together. If I wouldn't do that, and they start the same, and they end the same, if I pull a hard up line or anything like that, the elevators being different would turn into basically an aileron and would kind of roll. Right now we're getting ready to maiden it. And there's 3 big tips that I have for you. One is taxiing and getting it started. Don't be afraid to commit to moving it forward. A lot of guys get really afraid of tail draggers because they tend to, just keep fishtailing, but it's not necessary if you add throttle. So don't be afraid to hit the throttle. Always put a little elevator in when you're taxiing around because that's what keeps the tail on the ground. The other thing is, and the most important thing is, always take off with a lot of speed. Let the plane stay on the ground as long as you possibly can. And make sure that it is going as fast as it needs to go, because the biggest mistakes that's made, especially with warbirds on maiden flights, is they leave the ground, they weren't going very fast, one wing drops, and you just don't have enough air moving over the surface to turn it back. And so in this case, we're going to do everything possible to leave it on the ground as long as it can. Warbirds just jump up off the ground every once in a while, but that is our goal. Before we actually do this maiden, I'm going to show you some footage of how to do it properly and what can happen. Like I said, sometimes they want to just snatch right up in the air real quick. This is an example of just a beautiful takeoff, long and straight. Watch how quickly that just comes right up in the air. The point is, this can happen to the best pilots with really good airplanes. You just have to be ready for it. Here's a maiden I did just after Mitch's plane. I tried very hard to keep this jet on the ground as long as possible, but it still came up a little faster than I hoped. This is Mitch's other plane that we were maiden, and watch how nice and long and low this takeoff was. It took off with exactly the right speed. What are we talking about? Well, here's our maiden now. Watch. Okay, it came off the ground pretty quick, a lot quicker than I wanted it to. Now we're going to trim it. It's going to take a lot of right trim here because it's kind of a little out of control here, so hold on. Obviously this left the ground way earlier than I wanted to, but the goal still has to be to keep this thing on the ground as long as possible. As you can see, the plane is really pitchy. The elevator is out of trim, so we're going to fix that.
Too much up?
Yeah. Alright, here we go. A little more aileron trim. One click of rudder and it's flying straight as an arrow. So now we have what would be a perfectly flying aircraft. Alright, we're just going to do a nice pass down the center just to kind of take a look at our airplane. Now I'm going to check the CG. Go up, Mitch did a great job with the CG. I think it's about perfect. So we're in business.
Yeah, it's the factory CG.
Before we watch the landing, we're going to go over some of the basics as what we're trying to accomplish when we land. The first was my tip about pointing the nose at you, making sure that we are also making a nice long approach. That's really important. The other thing is that we want to make sure we're not approaching from a great height, because a great height means that we have to transfer all of that altitude into airspeed, and it will be hard to slow the aircraft down. I'll be showing you a few jets landing just because they illustrate the point very well, and quite frankly I don't have any warbirds in my hangar at the moment. But you can see its glide path is doing very well, and the big thing that I want to stress to everybody is please hold the aircraft off the ground as long as you can until it is slow enough to land without bouncing. As you can see, I could have landed any time, but I tried to just hold it off so it touched down very soft. This is clearly a mistake resulting from the plane being too fast and forcing it down. Here's another example of intentionally holding it off as long as I possibly could, only because it was an air show. I wanted it to look really pretty. Again, another example of being at that 2 foot level where you can just hold it off the ground and let it just sink those last little bit. And the longer you hold it off, the prettier the landing looks, and the slower the plane will be, and that's very important. Okay, what we're going to try and do on landing, we've got the gear down, we've already checked it. Especially first flight, we're going to do a nice long approach. And I'm not going to start it too high because that compromises our speed, because losing altitude tends to add more speed. So I'm going to hold it nice and steady and just let it come down a few feet at a time. Cut the throttle to make sure you're nice and slow. No flaps on. Okay, here's where things can often go way wrong. This plane was very pitchy, and without flaps, it was incredibly fast coming down. But still, as long as I held it off the ground, it took way more runway than we wanted to. But eventually I can slow it down a little bit. Of course it bounced. This was not the greatest landing.
What I mean,
the elevator was
the elevator? Yeah.
Here was another Warbird landing I wanted to show you, and it's really just a beautiful landing. You see the glide slope is nice and shallow, and the plane slows down very well because of the flaps, and it is a plane that does float very well. But it's a beautiful, beautiful landing. And here's an example of the same flying characteristics from a very, very similar aircraft. And look, just coming down faster just doesn't look as nice. This is an example of not holding the plane off, but it ending up kind of successful. Still not good and not pretty. This is another Maiden where I was coming in a little too fast, but as long as I held it off, it was nice. Here's another result of a mistake. This is me in one of my more ridiculously bad landings, doing everything I could to follow my own rules. But this is obviously just too fast, and it just keeps bouncing up in the air. That was not what I had in mind. Terrible. I just wanted that nose to just come down so smooth. And even though I got my lesson this time, even trying it again the next time at a different field, you'll see I'm still a little bit too fast. As good as I tried to land it, you see what happens when the plane is too fast. I landed a little fast for full flaps, but
I lost that for halfway.
Here was a little Maiden I did with a Hobbyking Spitfire that worked out really well. And the moral of this story is you just have to do the right things over and over and over again. And sometimes they work out well, sometimes they don't. But if you're doing things properly and you have the right technique, you will do it properly. This is a Maiden I did for my friend Tom just a little after the other one on the same day. And as you can see, we just followed the rules and the plane came down really nicely. Finally, this is the maiden flight landing from my pilot Predator, and once again, all I tried to do is keep it off the ground as long as possible. We have another great coincidence. Here was the maiden flight of that jet you saw me set up the flaps. And we ended up with a bit of an emergency situation because of an improper setup. I was told to put throw on it because it was very, very difficult to land. Meaning both ailerons were going up in order to help slow the aircraft down. And when I did it, the plane went completely out of control. And I couldn't even turn the plane to be able to fly straight and level. So I had a real problem. So as you can see here, I did a very slow, low pass with only half flaps, which I could control the plane with half flaps. But if the plane couldn't land with full flaps, I was really, really afraid that half flaps, it would just not come down. So what I did was I took an extremely long approach, got it as slow as I possibly could, just following my own rules. I was very worried it wouldn't come down, but as you can see, it made it down and did just fine. I cut the engine to make sure I didn't have any
good job.
thrust. But anyway,
now you can go change your underpants.
Big problem. We have another really rare opportunity. This is absolutely scratch built. My friend Fahim again. From Wow Models, he has scratch built this and it is beautiful. He's calling it the Enola Gay. We're going to maiden it today and we're going to show you all the things that we talked about on the previous lesson. Okay, we're going to maiden this thing and we've thoroughly checked everything, gear, flaps, mixes, everything, and it's ready to fly. So we're going to try and take the longest, smoothest takeoff possible and make sure when we're coming in, just like the other lessons, we're going to make sure we're not landing fast. jumped up a little more than I wanted to. You're up.
There's a picture of somebody.
I can find
Got
it.
it, man. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I know. Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Like you've seen before, sometimes things go wrong, but sometimes they go exactly right. Well, now I've got a little bit of bonus footage for you just for fun. This is a little mini B-17 that I was having some fun with on a windy day and doing a little bit of 3D with it. It's pretty funny. Flying backwards.